Streaming now on CBS News Los Angeles, this is Primary Countdown. Tonight, looking to secure a second term, the LA County Sheriff embroiled in controversy, 8 challengers looking to take his job. And the battle for Congress, results coming in from the largest primary so far in the midterm elections, what it all says about the influence of former President Donald Trump. And Democrats in Orange County hoping to win back a seat in the U.S. House from a Republican. One of the most closely watched congressional races in the nation is right here in Southern California. Good day to you, everybody. I'm Tom Waite. Thank you so much for joining us. We are now less than 3 weeks from the June primary, and voting is now underway. And as we approach the election night, we continue to keep a close eye on the key races in Southern California. One of the most hotly contested races is for LA County Sheriff. 8 challengers, all hoping to unseat incumbent Alex Villanueva. Our senior reporter Ross Palumbo with a look now at the candidates.
At the end of the day, we're trying to make the community safer, and we're succeeding in that.
How are you succeeding in making the community safer? It sounds like you haven't succeeded in that.
Well, the numbers are going the wrong direction. In other areas, the numbers
Isn't that the metric?
In other areas, the numbers are going the right direction.
His own metric saying homicides jumped 94%.
On your watch. Is that a failure on your part?
Not at all. The pandemic happened on my watch as well. Civil unrest. Defunding of law enforcement.
But his own staff, like Eli Vera, say the sheriff has failed.
Well, you were on the command staff, right?
I was one of his chiefs, and that's where we started doing this, because he went in a completely different direction.
That you're saying he's absolutely performed in the opposite of what he's promised.
He's the most divisive person that I've ever met.
The picture is strikingly similar for candidate Eric Strong.
Your face always looks so serious almost.
The sheriff not only reassigning him.
Did you feel that was just personal?
I did.
But under Villanueva, his wife was also suddenly reassigned.
Told her she was being put under investigation and being transferred.
You announcing your candidacy had something to do with your wife's situation?
Absolutely.
At Internal Affairs nearly a decade ago, his investigation, he says, exposed the 3,000 boys deputy gang problem, ending with 6 deputies losing their jobs. And he says he can do it again.
Can you solve that problem?
I think I can.
Another candidate, though, says the largest problem is corruption.
You think Sheriff Villanueva is corrupt?
I do. Absolutely.
What LAX Police Chief Cecil Rambo does know, what he's been running on, is how deep his roots go in the community.
It was just natural for me to want to give back to the community and work with the community. And I'm from the community. They're part of me.
Candidate Matt Rodriguez had been a big part of Sheriff Villanueva's community.
There's me there as a staff instructor at the academy, and that's Alex Villanueva. We were partners on the same staff.
Has he changed a lot since then?
I don't know the man anymore. I don't think he created any trust. I think the way he's handled the homeless issue is pure political theater. Why are you so confrontational? And I kind of sat back, watched the George Floyd situation, and said, you know what, I'm running for sheriff.
And you have to be open enough to assess yourself.
And making those assessments an asset is a central theme in Robert Luna's campaign.
I'm a lifelong learner, and you get the job done.
That's how he says he got the job done in Long Beach with recent crime, assessing each individual neighborhood and responding with targeted foot patrols.
We engage the community on a very different level in some of the most violent reporting districts, and it worked.
In the wake of George Floyd's murder, similar protests were happening across LA County.
All of a sudden, you have 15,000 people.
And retired LASD captain Britta Steinbrenner was right at the center.
But you were ready.
We were ready.
She commanded the hundreds of deputies directly dealing with it.
They're in civil unrest.
And says she's the woman behind the sheriff's claims of success.
Do you think he was taking credit for your success?
He takes credit for everyone's success.
All right, a lot to talk about in that race and some major developments this week in the contest for LA Mayor. Let's bring in our panel of experts. All right, joining us tonight. Tonight we are joined by Fernando Guerra, political science professor at LMU, and back with us this evening are Jennifer Cryer, professor, assistant professor of political science at USC, and of course, Loyola Law professor and political commentator Jessica Levinson, also host of the podcast Passing Judgment. Thank you all so much for joining us. Let's start with you, Professor Guerra. Where do you see things standing right now in this race for sheriff, with crime in some categories rising? Will the public blame the sheriff for that, and is he in trouble?
Just given the number of candidates and the amount of controversy, I think he is in trouble, and I think it will be hard pressed to get over 50% this June. And so the question is, who's going to be the other candidate that's going to face him off in November, and what kind of campaign will we have between now and then?
Professor Cryer, your take?
I do think that similarly, there are some issues that need to be addressed. And even with having large financial resources, being an incumbent, it doesn't necessarily proffer any guarantee that the race will go his way. And the way that he's chosen to spend his money right now on his ad has more controversy than it has. And
I was going to go to Professor Levinson, but it looks there she's back. Professor Levinson, what's your sort of analysis on his position with the public? I know he's had some issues with, we can get to this later, with some of the county supervisors, but where does he stand in the public eye, do you think?
I think, like almost every place in America, the public is divided, but I think that there is a large percentage of the population in Los Angeles that feels like they did not get what they thought they were buying. That Sheriff Villanueva ran as a reformer. He said, I'm going to clean up the sheriff's department. And almost from day one, there was controversy. There's been controversy about his hiring practices, controversy about how he implements oversight, controversy about the jails, controversy about these deputy gangs. And of course, as you mentioned, controversy with respect to how he interacts with the county supervisors. I don't think we have ever had such a breakdown between the sheriff and the county supervisor before, at least not in my memory. Right. I mean, and he has, let's be honest, the sheriff has taken positions that maybe this is very popular for some people, but are just breathtaking in the sense that he said things like, I'm not going to implement a vaccine requirement. He's very different from any sheriff we've seen in recent history.
Let's take a look at an ad that he recently released, and I want to get your take on that. Let's go ahead and roll that.
Lord, give me the strength to protect the public from violent crime. Give me the compassion and strength to help our homeless find shelter.
Professor Cryer, let's start with you. You have a specialty in focusing on political messaging. Yeah. What is your take on some of these striking images we're seeing in that commercial? We're seeing a very powerful religious message combined with law enforcement. What's your take?
Yeah, character ads and image ads are supposed to increase positivity across voters. It's supposed to make them feel like candidates have a sense of credibility and a degree of competence to meet the challenges before them. And one thing that this ad doesn't do as an image ad is address any of those components. Instead, it kind of evokes this supplication or a plea to a higher power, suggesting that perhaps he feels that he doesn't have the capacity right now, or that he needs additional guidance to get on course. And so it leaves a lot of discomfort. It's not a typical image ad, because the message being sent is, let's go above because I am not fully equipped right now, which is never a message you kind of want in a political campaign.
Yeah, Professor Levinson, who do you think he's trying to reach with this ad?
Well, I think he's trying to say that he's a devout person, he's a religious person, he's a trustworthy person, that he sees himself as part of a bigger power, that he sees this as his mission. And so this is not just about him, this is about a mission-driven campaign. And it's certainly, I think, for a lot of voters in Los Angeles, again, not what we're used to seeing. There's a difference between saying, I'm somebody for whom faith is very important, and seeing an ad like that in a church.
Professor Guerra, do you think that it could backfire by trying to link himself so intently there with religious icons.
I don't get this. I mean, I'm Catholic. I teach at a Catholic university, and it made me cringe. It's sort of not even understanding the voter demographics and what moves voters. This type of a message hasn't moved LA County voters in over a decade, 2 decades. And I have no understanding of the research, the focus group that led them to do this message. It just further to me that he indicates that he lives in a bubble and his campaign lives in a bubble. This campaign ad will hurt him more with a typical LA County voter than it will help him. What I know of the proclivities of LA County voters, I just don't get it. To me, it blows my mind from a political campaign perspective.
And then let's go around one more time here. I'm curious who you think, each of you think, is the strongest candidate that has, the sort of potential to defeat him. Professor Levinson, let's start with you.
So I think right now it's probably Robert Luna. He's picked up the endorsement of the LA Times, of the Daily News. He's doing pretty well with respect to fundraising. We're talking about him. All of the, I think, top tier candidates, as far as I can see, frankly, they have a similar message of Villanueva has to go. I'm the person who can clean up the sheriff's department. I'm the person who can get rid of the deputy gangs. I'm the person who's really going to work cooperatively on homelessness. I'm the person who's going to work on oversight. So we're really looking to see, and they all have a lot of law enforcement experience. So I think the voters, again, who can't look at things like party affiliation, they're looking for things like endorsements. And Robert Luna's picked up some big ones.
And Professor Guerra?
Yeah, 4 years ago, the Sheriff Alex Villanueva had the Democratic Party, the labor unions, the LA Times endorsement, et cetera. He's going to have none of those. He will have the deputy unions, but not anybody else. And I've never seen a candidate alienate his base, the people that got him elected, so quickly and thoroughly. I think it is Luna, but there's several others. And I also believe that whoever ends up coming in this race with Alex Villanueva, the others will coalesce around that individual. I do expect Villanueva to make the runoff and probably even maybe have the highest number of votes in the primary. I don't expect that will be the case in November, though.
And Professor Cryer.
Similarly, Luna is doing very well with fundraising, with collecting endorsements. There are, of course, other candidates. Again, they have past ties to the Los Angeles Sheriff Department, previous administrations that also were mired in controversy. And then again, Steinbrenner is a little bit low in rank as compared to the rest, but together they all represent alternatives to Villanueva's administration.
Thank you so much to all of you, and I'm sure we'll have you back here again. The primary is just a few weeks away now, and voting is already going. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Fighting for control of Congress. Key races playing out in primaries across the country. Analysis on those primaries on Primary Countdown continues. Welcome back to Primary Countdown. I'm Tom Waite, and we are now joined from the Capitol by CBS News political reporter Caitlin Huey-Burns. Thank you so much, Caitlin, for joining us. A big night on Tuesday night for the primaries across the country. What are some of the takeaways that you see from that night?
Hey, Tom. Well, what we were watching for heading into these primaries was what is the extent of former President Trump's influence over the Republican Party. He endorsed a handful of candidates who were competing in primaries in the Republican Party for Senate, for governor, for congressional races, and whether he still has the ability to not only help them with fundraising, name ID, getting up in the polls, but also making it through the finish line. And the results were a pretty mixed bag. The biggest race that we were watching was a Senate race in Pennsylvania, Republican primary for an open seat, Dr. Oz and David McCormick. the former President Trump endorsed Dr. Oz, but that didn't seem to be enough to let him win this race outright. And in Pennsylvania, if it comes down to less than a percentage point separating the candidates, or less than half a percentage point separating the candidates, it goes into a runoff.
The Republican winner for the primary there for the governor's position, Mastriano, he is somebody who was at the Capitol insurrection on January 6th. He has pushed the false claim that President Trump won or had the election stolen from him in the presidential election of 2020. What does that say about the electorate right now, that someone like that can win the Republican primary for governor in that state?
Well, we've seen in Republican primaries that the way to get an endorsement from Trump and to get the eye of the Republican Party base is to echo these false claims about the election. And you're right to note this primary. This is a really important dynamic to watch here, because in Pennsylvania, the governor chooses the Secretary of State in the state. And as we know, the Secretary of State oversees elections. So here you have the Republican Party nominating a key election denier. You mentioned he was at the rally ahead of the insurrection. He was outside the Capitol during the insurrection and has really promoted these false claims about the election, has pushed in his state for a separate set of electors, tried to get the results overturned. He's actually been subpoenaed by the January 6th committee because of that. They want to know what kinds of efforts he was trying to make. And so the idea that you could have an election denier as governor of a state that picks the Secretary of State that oversees elections is raising a lot of questions about where the party is going, and of course raises a lot of questions for democracy in the state. So Republicans up here have been a little bit nervous about that. He got a very tepid endorsement from the Republican Governors Association. That just goes to show that this is something to watch. Republicans are concerned, but this is someone who was backed full-heartedly by former President Trump.
And speaking of some of the candidates that former President Trump was supporting, he didn't give a full-throated endorsement of Madison Cawthorn. Many people, of course, have heard that name. Scandal-plagued young congressman from North Carolina. He did not win his primary. What's your takeaway on that?
Yeah, that was also a really interesting primary to watch. Trump had endorsed Cawthorn, had really gone to bat for him. Cawthorn is a fervent supporter of the former president, but local Republicans in North Carolina really rallied against the state senator running against him. And actually up here on Capitol Hill, Tom Tillis, who's the junior senator from North Carolina, really was behind that effort to oust Cawthorn and support the state senator running against him, who actually won that race. But when you look at this race, you know, a lot of voters there were saying that Cawthorn really just wasn't delivering for the district, that he wasn't paying attention to local issues, and that he was young. He's the youngest member of Congress, youngest to be elected, wasn't really doing the job well. And so that's an instance where Trump's endorsement was not enough to get him through a primary, and now he will be a one-term congressman.
And our last question here, Caitlin, it has to do with the horrific Buffalo shooting and the white supremacists who carried it out. These kind of racially motivated crimes. What role do you think white supremacy will play in terms of themes in the campaign on both the Democratic and Republican side?
Well, we saw President Biden go to Buffalo yesterday to meet with the families, and he focused his speech there on this very theme, talking about white supremacy, calling it a poison that needs to be stopped in the United States. And that was really an interesting moment, because we often see after these mass shootings, as horrific and tragic as they are, there's little appetite for any sort of legislation on Capitol Hill, anything to kind of move the needle or change the dynamic. And so it was interesting to see Democrats focus on this instead of, you know, pushing for gun reforms or other measures that they know are just not going to pass muster up here on the Hill. And so that's what we will likely see, these themes that Democrats will bring up in some of these races, particularly pointing to the way in which several Republican candidates have echoed sentiments related to the so-called replacement theory, this racist theory of immigrants replacing white Americans here. And we've seen the immigration rhetoric among Republican candidates that was really started by former President Trump, come to light in these primaries. So this is certainly a dynamic to watch as we're heading into the midterms.
Thank you so much, Caitlin Huey-Burns, joining us from Capitol Hill. We appreciate your thoughts and analysis. We'll, of course, have more from you, I'm sure, as the elections draw closer. All right, we'll be right back. Thanks so much. We'll see you in just a few moments. One of the most watched congressional races in LA and the country is right here in the area, and a new district just carved out of Orange County. Here's Michelle Geely.
There is one Democrat hoping to unseat Orange County Congresswoman Michelle Steele in the race for the newly drawn 45th district. His name is Jay Chen.
I'm very pragmatic. I am a Democrat, but I have a national security background. I served in Operation Inherent Resolve. So from 2019 to 2020, I was deployed to the Middle East for the campaign to defeat ISIS. And I care a lot about education. I've served on a local school board as well as a community college board. And I have a small business background. So I understand the difficulties of running a business and how important it is for government to be supportive.
The boundaries of the district just changed, the result of the 2020 census. It now starts in the north with Cerritos and Buena Park and runs south to Westminster, Garden Grove, and Fountain Valley. We met the Congresswoman at a constituent's business, Moon Goat Coffee in Garden Grove. Helping people in her district is one of the best parts of the job, according to Steele. She recently helped secure a substantial back tax refund for the shop's owner, who had no luck with the IRS for many years.
For this coffee shop, they couldn't get for 2013 tax refund from IRS. Actually, I delivered it for almost $300,000. We're still working on it for 2015. This tax agency is very, very tough to get it. We can help them to get it. And on the same time, not just taxes, how about visa, how about passport, how about SBA loans? I can work with people and I can deliver those, and that's the best thing that I can do for the people.
But Jay Chen is highly critical of the job Michelle Steele is doing.
I think she has been doing a terrible job. I mean, we just came out of a pandemic. President Biden is trying to do everything he can to help us recover. As a trustee with Mount San Antonio College, I know how difficult it was for us to get reopened safely so students could come back onto campus. And the American Rescue Plan Act provided tens of millions of dollars to various, schools to get reopened, and she voted against it. And, small businesses have had a really hard time coping and reopening, and she voted against, funding that would support the small businesses as well.
Steele says she was against the stimulus package because any relief passed by Congress should be targeted, temporary, and tied to COVID. Steele points out that at the time of the vote, $1 trillion in COVID funds hadn't been spent. At a virtual town hall, Michelle Steele addressed the top 3 concerns of voters. Constituents worry most about gas prices, inflation, and border security.
I think we should control our lives, here, and not government has to control. So, we really have to talk about that. We really have to less spending and less taxes, less regulations, less mandates, and we can have our freedom here, and that can control the inflation.
A third candidate just got in under the wire. Republican Long Pham filed his candidate papers on the last day. He is an engineer from Fountain Valley who is funding his own campaign. In Orange County, Michelle Geely, CBS News, Los Angeles.
Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next week.